Hello, everyone. Welcome. We are so happy to have you guys joining us for a very special webinar. This is Five Principles of Book Launch Budgeting with Joel Pitney of Launch My Book. I'm going to do a very brief introduction of Joel and just a couple of little housekeeping things, and then I'm going to turn it over to the star of the show. So, Joel Pitney is a collaborative writer, former journalist, and the founder of Launch My Book. In addition to his work as a writer, Pitney is also founder and president of Launch My Book, a book production and promotion company he founded in 2013. In that role, he has run marketing campaigns for nonfiction books spanning business, self help, spiritual, and other genres, including multiple New York Times bestsellers. The company also runs a full-service self-publishing company and has published a wide variety of educational content for writers on their website, which I'll drop in the chat in just a moment for you guys. So please help me welcome Joel. And if you guys have questions as he talks, I ask you to please use the Q&A box that you'll see at the bottom of your screen, and we will get to those at the end. So over to you, Joel.
Hi, thank you very much. I'm excited to be doing this today. I think this is, I don't know, maybe my fourth or fifth presentation with women in publishing over the last couple of years. So I love this community, and I think we share a common mission. Which is what this workshop's all about. Is I like to sort of share all the things I've learned about all aspects of the book launching process with people, so that everybody can make informed decisions and get the right outcome for themselves. Um, so this is called book launch budgeting, and I know that I've done this presentation sort of virtually and in person several times, and I know that sometimes because it's called book launch budgeting, I think some people think this is just about the marketing side of things. So if that's the case, I apologize. I will talk about marketing as well, but in this workshop, I want to cover all aspects, starting way back at the beginning in the writing and publishing side as well. So that's what we're going to go through. I've got a simple little slide here, and then we can sort of, I'll try to keep the presentation brief so that we can fill in the gaps with a lot of questions. And another thing just to say as we get started, because there's no silver bullet solution for basically anything in the universe, including all things related to books and book launching and book publishing, I don't like to get overly prescriptive and practical about exactly what you can expect to pay for exactly this thing and that thing. I like to focus more on principles and general rules of thumb that anybody can sort of apply to their own unique situation, because literally every book and every author is unique in my experience. And so the rules are going to change depending on your situation. So we're going to dive in. And also, again, if you want to chime in with questions along the way, feel free to put them in the chat, and then Joy will accumulate them, and then we'll get to them in the end. All right. So this is just a in the beginning of the whole publishing process. Forgive me if people are further along, but I always like to assume that everybody's starting at square one. And so when you're thinking about budgeting, one thing I always think is an important decision is whether you're going to hire a company to publish your book, or if you're going to do it yourself, right? And again, we're talking about, this isn't more on the self-publishing side, the indie publishing side, less traditional publishing, but we'll cover things. So I've got a little decision-making tree here. You kind of have a couple decisions to make. If you're gonna just hire a company that can handle all the production of your book for you, all those elements, that's sort of this pathway over here on the right in red. And then the alternative would be to just DIY the whole thing, which means you'd hire your own team, you'd hire all your editors and your book designers and et cetera. And so you kind of have this question: am I going to do it myself, or am I going to hire a company? And then if you are going to do it yourself, then these are all the different things that you're going to need to hire for. If you're going to hire a company, you have a choice between a hybrid publisher, which is kind of a pay-to-play company that it's basically self-publishing, but they publish the book under their name, and then, or you can hire a publishing assist company that'll do the work for you, but everything's under your name. So the reason I like to bring this up at the beginning is that a lot of what we're going to be talking about is going to be more on the DIY side of the street. If you're hiring a company, there's basically just packages you can hire for, and we can talk more about what those ranges are. But what I want to get more into is if you're going to DIY this, if you're going to hire your own team, what you can be expecting to pay and how you can make those decisions. I have a whole article on this, by the way, in my website, and we can share that in the chat. All right. So we've made our decision. So we're going to go through, we're going to talk about the 5 book launch budgeting principles. We're going to go through it, talk about what you need to budget for, and then how to build your own unique budget. And then we're going to have some time for Q&A at the end. All right. So why budget? Now, this kind of seems obvious, but I've noticed that in the book publishing world, people sort of exist in it's almost like a alternate fantasy universe where the same rules that apply to running your own business or managing your own household somehow doesn't apply. And so everybody knows that if you're going to run a business, you need to create a budget because you need to know what to expect to pay. You need to have some projected income, that kind of thing. If you're creating a household budget, in my own personal household, our fiscal year runs from August to July for some reason. So we're in the process of building our budget for 2026 and 2027. And you need to build a budget so you know what you're going to spend on your mortgage and what you're going to spend on your groceries and how much you need to set aside, all that kind of stuff. So the more planning you can do for any endeavor, the more likely you're going to be able to use that money efficiently and not run out. And that's applies to books as well. So it's really critical that people create a budget for this whole book process. And I'll tell you, I speak with, hundreds of authors every year at conferences and workshops, working with my company. And I would say at least half, if not more, don't think of it this way. They kind of just stumble their way through the process, paying little bits here and there. And then all of a sudden they get to the end, they have no money left. And so they didn't create a budget. Or they get surprised by how much something costs versus something else. And so they end up spending too much on one thing and not enough on the other. So it's really critical that if you're going to, no matter where you are in your publishing journey, whether this is your first book or your 17th book, whether you've already published and you're looking for marketing or whether you're at the beginning, you need to create a budget. All right, 5 principles of book launch budgeting. So this is similar to what we just talked about. So number 1, and this is probably the most important one, that's why it's first, is you need to budget for all dimensions of your launch, right? So this is kind of like the budgeting process itself. You don't want to spend all your money on the beginning where you're hiring an editor and a developmental editor and a copy editor, and you spend all your money on that, and you have nothing left over to spend on building your author platform or promoting your book. So you need to make sure that you're budgeting for all aspects of that. Otherwise, you'll run out. Okay. And these are the 4 general aspects of what I consider to be a book launch. So there's the writing and the editing of the book, right? Some people hire a ghostwriter, which is what I'm a ghostwriter in addition to doing other things. And so some people will budget to actually work with someone to help them write the book. My guess is most people here wouldn't need that, but a lot of people will want to work with a good developmental editor, right? So that you can take your book to the next level. And then there's also copy editing your book, which you have to make sure you do as well. So you need to set aside money for that. A lot of people overlook that. They kind of think they can just have a friend or a spouse do that, right? But this is a really important part of the process. Then there's the publishing of your book. There's all the design, cover design, interior design, etc. We're going to go into all this later. And then there's building a platform. So we'll talk about this a little bit more later. But when I think about marketing, these last 2 dimensions fall under that umbrella. So marketing to me is building a platform, which is basically having some kind of a content strategy where you're building a following online. Some people do it offline, but it's mostly online, where people are engaging with you on an ongoing basis. And that's more of a long game approach to marketing. And then the second dimension is promotions. And these are running specific short-term promotions, ads, PR, podcast tours, all that kind of stuff that you do specific around your book. And that is the other dimension of marketing that you need to make sure you budget for. So you got to budget for all of it. And these are the 4 general buckets. All right. So the other one, this is another one I think is really, really, really important. DIY what you can and hire experts for what you can't. So my guess is most people on this call don't have hundreds of thousands of dollars, probably not even tens of thousands of dollars to be spending on the entirety of their book launch campaign, right? You don't have a blank check to just spend on all the different services and professional support you're going to need along the way. So that means you're going to have to hire for some of this and you're going to have to DIY some of it yourself. That's a great way to keep your budget economical, right? So, part of my framework for building a book launch budget is going through all these dimensions, figuring out, okay, this is an aspect of the book launch process that is important, but I think that maybe I could do it myself based on my own expertise and my own passion. So maybe I'm comfortable with doing social media promotions, and so I'm going to take that on myself, and I'm not going to hire a company for that. I'm going to spend my budget on cover design because I know nothing about cover design, right? So you want to kind of go through the different dimensions of your budget, figure out what you could hire for, what you need to hire for, what you can DIY, and then there's going to be some question marks in between. And again, we're going to go through this in more detail later. And also, we have an elaborate ebook that takes you through literally every aspect of this process and helps you figure out what you can DIY and what you need to hire for and what are the budget ranges and all that kind of stuff. So that's principle number 2. All right. Now, principle number 3. Again, the thing about principles is they're distinct, but they also overlap, right? So you really need to plan for a marathon, not a sprint. So a lot of people get this wrong about books. I don't know where this notion comes from. I think maybe it's the old school traditional publishing approach where everybody prepares everything for that first week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or up to 3 months, right? And everything is for this big launch. And if they can just make a big enough splash during that launch period, then the rest will sort of just it'll be like starting a wildfire. It'll spread from there, right? And if they don't take off in those first few months, then it's not going to work, right? I think that's the way books used to get done in the 90s and early 2000s, maybe. I don't know. It's definitely not how it works now. Publishing is a marathon, not a sprint. And that means that you need to be budgeting in a way where you're going to have funds available to you to do things not over a month period, but over a multiple year long period, right? This is a kind of a tangential topic, but one of the keys to succeeding in this business, especially if you're an indie author, is publishing multiple books over a long period of time, because you need to build readers and you need to give them multiple products to sell to them. So you want to budget not just in a 6 to 12 month window, but you should be budgeting in a 3 to 5 year window. And what that's going to look like is going to be different for each person, how that budget gets spread. But it's important just to remember that we're not talking about just burning all our money up front and then hoping it works. It's going to take a long time for you to slowly build over time. All right, so this is the depressing slide. And again, it's another topic, which I've written and talked about quite a bit on our platform, because I have an honesty policy with my company and with all my content. In fact, we have a new podcast called If I'm Being Honest, which you can check out. But I really like everyone to have really sober expectations when you're coming into your publishing venture, right? Don't expect to make your money back right away. It just doesn't happen, right? There's sort of like two lessons in this, one for fiction and one for nonfiction. So in fiction books, you're not going to make your money back on your first book. It's just not going to happen, right? The formula for making your money back is to publish multiple books, right? And I've seen this play out many, many times. I'm sure many of you that have this experience, I like to go to the Author Nation conference in Las Vegas every year, and it's got some of the most successful indie authors out there who go. And I always ask the successful authors, well, what's the key to success? And almost everybody says you've got to publish multiple books, and not just 2 or 3. We're talking like 8, 9, 10. I met a guy who he was on his 17th book, and he was still not quite ready to quit his day job, right? But he was close. So that's the good news, right? But the bad news is you can't be budgeting around this one book. You can't expect you can't expect your budget to pay itself off on that first book. You need to be ready to lose money to get readers of your first book so that they stick around and want to buy book 2 and book 3 and book 4 and book 5, because every single book that you publish after the first one, that's a free customer. Anybody who likes that first book, they're going to buy your second book, and you're not going to spend a dime trying to promote the book to them. So that's how you start to move your budget from the red to the black. On the nonfiction side, it's a similar concept. Some nonfiction authors publish multiple books as a way to make their money back, which is great. But not all nonfiction authors have more than 1 or 2 books in them. So the way to monetize and build your budget to support that nonfiction book is to have a way to generate income beyond the royalties of your book, right? So a lot of people that we work with are, business consultants or speakers, or, we recently published a book for a paid subscription podcast, right? And so the book, you want to get readers, you'll lose money on getting a reader. You're going to end up spending more money to publish and promote that book than you'll get through the royalties of each sale. But that person will then spend money with you in another way. So maybe they'll sign up for a course that you have, or maybe we had a guy who published his book because he wanted to get PR around his business concept. He had published a book called, what was it called? Drafting a Dream. And it was about how he had built a restaurant concept where people would pour their own beer. It's a really cool book. I highly recommend you check it out if you're an entrepreneur in any space. But he wanted to get some PR around his business because he wanted to sell the business. And he published this book. It was really beautiful and professional. He got a bunch of PR around it, and it helped him secure the sale of his company. And so for him, that's how he monetized it. So I'm saying all these stories, sharing all these stories because it's important that when you build your budget, you shouldn't expect that single book to bring you into the black. Okay, that's important as you build it. All right, so this is the 5th principle, and this one's kind of funny because I got really specific here. And so I'm saying, you should save at least 1/3 or 33% of your budget for marketing. Did I do all kinds of scientific research where I to figure out this number? Absolutely not. I do a short little meditation every morning, and I was sitting around one day before I gave a presentation, and I realized, you know what? I think 33% would be a good number to say here for the marketing budget. So it's a little arbitrary, but the reason I chose 1/3 is it's a high number. It feels high. And the point here is you shouldn't spend all your money on the publishing and production side. You need to save some money, and a decent amount of money, for your marketing. And like we talked about earlier, that includes that platform building and that promotion. So the whole point of saying 1/3 is that I want people to feel like they need to stretch a little bit. They need to set aside a little more money than they would otherwise for this aspect. And how that money gets spent, we can talk more about later, but it's just a general rule of thumb. All right. So those are my 5 budgeting principles, and there are probably more. If you have any great budgeting principles yourselves, I'd love to hear them because, I can always update this presentation. But they're kind of 5 rules of thumb that I think you can use to approach building a budget for your book. All right, so now I want to dive into more the nuts and bolts. And again, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this. I want to save lots of time for Q&A. A lot of the detail that I'm going to be presenting here is available in our ebook, and we've got a little QR code that you can scan at the end to go download it. It's totally free. And it's going to break down all the detailed information for what each aspect of the book launch process is, what are the budget ranges, and then what are sort of like, what are the pros and cons of doing it yourself versus hiring, and what questions should you be asking yourself when you're trying to make those decisions. All right, so the first dimension, which we touched on a little bit, is what I call production. And Some people might separate editing and publishing into two different dimensions. I'm just combining them into one. So the production side is creating that book, right? Everything it takes to get that book started. Now, I probably should include writing here, right? Because um, again, I don't think anyone here is probably going to be hiring a ghostwriter, but you might be spending money on taking a writing course, or you might be going to a writer's retreat um, where you're getting feedback on your memoir, that kind of thing. So I would say in this editing should be really editing and writing. So that's any money you're spending on finishing up that book. Now, when you move into the formal editing process, the first stage is developmental editing. A lot of people don't think they need this. I'm a professional writer. I've now published five with another one on the way books as a ghostwriter to traditional publishers, right? Some of them are small houses, some of them are big houses. I have never ever not had my work developmental edited. And with every book I get better as a writer, but I still need developmental editing because that's someone who's going to be able to give you that objective feedback. Everybody knows when you're writing that your job is to take what's in your head and convey it through the page. And we're all at different levels of being able to do that. But I don't think any writer can do that perfectly without getting some external feedback. So I think it's extremely valuable to invest in some kind of developmental editing. Now, some people might you get that from a writers group, and that's fine as long as it's a really trusted professional, critique group. Some people might get it from their spouse. Be careful. I used to have my spouse do that for me, and all we ever did was fight. Um, so, but everybody needs that. If you want to create a quality product, if you just want to kind of get your book out there and you don't care, that's fine. So there's that piece. Then there's copy editing. Again, even the cleanest writers on earth need to have their book professionally copy edited. There's going to be a spectrum of how much you're going to need, but everybody needs to have a professional copy editor take a pass. And then by the way, I kind of blur line editing and copy editing into one, which is copy editing, because that's how my company does it, and a lot of editors do it that way. And then the last thing is proofing. And again, this is a final pass you need to make sure you're ready to do, right? After your book has been formatted is the best time to do it because it's at that point where you're going to be able to catch all the little last minute mistakes. I got my start as a professional writer working for a magazine, and what we would, every issue of the magazine, we would have had a copy editor go through and do multiple rounds on every article we wrote in Microsoft Word. Then we would put it into layout and design. And once the whole magazine got laid out with copy that had already been edited multiple times, we would then print out books of the magazine and we would give it to 20 people. And they would all go through and look for every little mistake in grammar and typo and everything. And everybody came back with their own long list, right? And inevitably, we'd do all that. We'd go to press. And then within 5 minutes of receiving the first copy of the book, there would be a little typo that someone would catch. Sorry, a magazine, not book. So I tell that story to let you know that proofing has to be done, right? You're not going to catch everything, but you need to have a professional proofer that can get your copy edited book from 95 to 99%. Again, I might be preaching to the choir here, but I just wanted to put that in. So you need to make sure you've budgeted for that. All right, so that's kind of the editing writing side, and now we're moving into publishing. These pieces are things that you could potentially do yourself, you could hire for, but the basic pieces of publishing are your cover design, your interior layout. Remember, you want to do an ebook as well, so you want to have someone who can design the interior for your print book and then convert it into a flowable ebook. Some people like to do the fixed layout PDF, which they can do automatically for free, but it won't look very good on e-readers if you do it that way. And then you need some kind of distribution setup. If you're a lot of people do that. Some people sell direct themselves. They use companies like BookFunnel and to kind of sell books themselves. A lot of people use print on demand platforms like Amazon KDP and Ingram Spark, but you need to make sure that you've invested time or money being ready for that. And then the last one is audiobook. A lot of people that I work with will budget for everything but the audiobook, and yet the number of people who are listening to audiobooks goes up every year. And so a lot of people will kind of say, oh, well, maybe I'll just publish the paperback and the ebook, but I'll wait to do the audiobook once I generate money from the sales of the paperback and the ebook. But that day will never come. So I always think it's a good idea to invest in an audiobook as well, because you've already put all this other money in. You've invested in writing, editing, design, interior, all these different things you've already invested. Why not put a little bit more money into having an audiobook version there for the people who only listen to books? And by the way, even though I'm a writer, I only listen to books. I'm too busy to do a lot of my own reading for pleasure. I've got a small child, so I love to listen to audiobooks while I'm doing chores or going for a walk. So I always feel like that's a great way to shore up your investment by making sure that you've invested in an audiobook as well. All right, so that's the production side. Now, that was kind of point 1 and 2 on the 4. And so on the marketing side, we're going to go into these dimensions a little bit too. So we've got platform building, and then we've got promotions. And I'm going to dive into more details in the following slides. But just as an overview, I'm a gardener. So it's one of my favorite things to do. And so I like to use gardening metaphors for things. So I'm going to use a gardening metaphor for the 2 of these things. So platform building is like the healthy soil in your garden, and book and promotions are like fertilizer. And anybody who's spent any time doing any kind of gardening, especially organic gardening, would know that you need to have a healthy soil. That's more fundamental. If you have a healthy soil but no fertilizer, you're going to have decent production. If you have a fertilizer but no healthy soil, you're not going to do very well in the long run. And then ideally you'll have both. So I like to think of platform building as the fertile soil of your marketing, and then the promotions as the fertilizer. And so platform building is some kind of a content strategy. And we'll get into that in a little bit more detail, but content strategy is basically some way that you are communicating regularly, weekly or more, with the world, with your audience, right? Some people that might be in the form of speaking or going on webinars. Some people might want to do a Substack a column. Some people might want to start a podcast. But you want to figure out what is your way of engaging in an ongoing way, and then creating that content, and then publishing and distributing that content through social media, websites, that kind of thing. So that's kind of your platform building. That's a long game. A lot of people I talk to, they're 3 months away from publishing, and they're like, I don't have a platform. And is it too late? And I always say, no, it would have been good if you started 2 years ago, but you can start now and just use your book launch as a way to build that platform, right? You won't get a lot of great numbers right off the top because you haven't put in the work leading up to your launch to get those numbers up, but you can use the publication of your book to build that platform. So that's platform building. And then the other side, we have promotions. And when it comes to book promotions, there's a billion of these things, right? There's a lot of different ways. I don't like to say that one is better than the other. Because every book is different, every author is different, every budget is different. But you can do PR, right? This is better for nonfiction than fiction, but PR is still a way to get is still a way to get attention for your book. You can do giveaways. That's one of my favorite things. You can do giveaways on Goodreads. You can do giveaways on BookBub and written word media. There's lots of ways where you can give away copies of your book to kickstart word of mouth. Virtual book tours, a lot of people like to do these. That's a way to get different influencers and bloggers to start talking about your book. And then there's ads, Facebook ads, Amazon ads, Google ads. There's a lot of different ads. We'll get more into this later, but ads are definitely a loss leader. Almost no one makes money on ads on their first book. The formula is to get someone reading the first one, and then you make your profit back on books 2, 3, 4, 5. So those are sort of like the general areas. All right. So how are we doing on time? Let's see here.
Good. You've got almost 30 minutes.
Almost 30 minutes. Okay. I'm going to keep going quick because I do want to answer questions here, but we're going to go through building the book launch budget. And we already covered a lot of this detail, but this is kind of our framework for figuring out what you can DIY and what you can hire for. So, and I'm publishing numbers in here. These are very broad. So, and I'm sure that everybody could find an example of somebody that they hired for less. So I'm just going to give you a general sense of how much things cost, right? So we already talked about editing and developmental editing, copy editing, proofing. So I'm not going to get into detail about what those things are. Um, so what does it cost, right? Um, a developmental editor, a good developmental editor is going to charge between 4 and 6 cents a word, generally speaking. Again, you could pay a little bit more for the highest of the high end. You could also pay less. Um, I tend to be someone when it comes to developmental editing, don't cheap out. Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it. That's something that you really shouldn't try to find the bargain version of. So you should expect these rough budget ranges. And again, I'm sure these aren't perfect, but they're close. These are close ranges for you. Copy editing, uh, you could go a little bit lower than 5 cents a word on this. I mean, you could find people who will do it for 3 to 4 as well. The thing about spending on any of these things is the more you spend, the more you can guarantee for the most part that you're going to get someone with high quality. Of course, you have to do all the reference checks and you have to make sure that they have the experience, et cetera. But the higher end are always, they're going to be very reliable. But you can sometimes find someone who's charging less. You can find your diamond in the rough who does a fabulous job. So again, that's what you can expect for a copy edit and then a proofread. Proofing is going to be 2, 3 cents a word. One thing that you want to be taking into consideration when you're looking at proofing is the proofer, and it depends on who you're working with, but a lot of times they're going to proof they're going to proof the book InDesign, and then all the edits they find are going to need to be made to that design. And some designers will charge for that and some won't. So you kind of have to figure out what that fee structure is going to be. But you can see here's some general budget ranges for all of this. This is all going to be published in our little ebook, so you don't have to worry about writing all this down. And all right, so where can you cut corners? This is why here's where we are. Can we cut corners on any of this? All right. Oh, I want to go back. So I thought that there was another slide here. I'm sorry, everybody. You can ignore this slide for a second. So where can you cut corners on editing? Okay. Basically, the further upstream you go, developmentaling being the highest upstream, the less you should cut corners, right? So you want to make sure that if you're going to be, if for instance you want to do, let's say there's a top tier, a mid tier, and a low tier for your budget that you could pay for these different services. For developmental editing, I'd err towards going top tier or at least mid tier, right? For copy editing is a little bit less important in this regard, but I wouldn't go low tier in copy editing, right? You could get away with doing mid tier and you're fine. And especially if you had a good developmental edit, then you could go mid tier in your copy editing because hopefully you'll have taken care of a lot of that. And then for proofing is a place where you could cut corners a little bit. You could do a lower tier. Because proofing is pretty straightforward. As long as the person is super experienced, it's okay to be on the lower end on your budget. Again, if you have a little bit extra money and you want to be sure, you can always spend more money, right? Should you do any of these yourself? Can you do any of this yourself? Absolutely not. Don't DIY any of the editing. Just not going to work. Even if you're super good at it, right? Even if you're a professional copy editor and you've written a book, you should have someone else copy edit it because you need third parties to do it. All right. So that's the editing side. Now we're going to move into the slide that's actually here, which is publishing. All right. So these are the different levels of publishing. We already talked about that. Elements of publishing: cover design, interior design, and distribution. So what does it cost? All right. So book covers. Now this is a controversial topic, right? I have seen book cover designers who charge $100 who are fabulous. I've seen $100 book cover designs that are amazing. But I would say 90% of the $100 cover designers out there look self-published. They look terrible. So again, what you're paying for is consistency, and you're also paying for collaboration. So anybody who's going to be a discount designer on a book cover is going to be is probably just going to spit out a couple images and you have to kind of live with it. And you're not going to have a lot of rounds of feedback. You're not going to be able to tweak and nuance things. I know I'm putting 2,000 in the upper range here. You can pay far more than that for a book cover. I don't think you should. I don't think you need to pay more than $2,000 for a book cover. What are you paying for when you go to that upper end? Well, you're paying for history and just mastery of craft, right? So you're going to get the incredible covers you see published by Simon and Schuster and Hachette and the Big Five. They're working with top end cover designers, and there's a layering effect. They know the market. They know they're really good at capturing the essence of your work, right? And the more you pay, the more consistent is going to be the product, the more mastery you're going to pay for. And then the third dimension is usually you're going to have way more collaboration there. My company, for instance, I think we charge, well, we actually just charge a whole publishing package now, but we're sort of in the middle. We're probably in the middle of this range just on cover design. And we work really closely with our authors to figure out exactly what that cover is going to look like. Sometimes too closely. Sometimes it takes too much back and forth for our sake to try and get that cover right and exactly the way the author wants it. And when you're working with a higher end cover designer, they're gonna try and match your own aesthetic desires and transmission of the essence of the book with understanding what works in that segment of the market. So yeah, I know that having a range of $100 all the way to $2,000 is almost useless when you're building a budget, but that is generally kind of what I found to be the case. All right, so your interior. So a lot of people overlook the interior of a book, right? The interior is kind of how the book is laid out. The running headers, what do the chapter openings look like? What's the font, etc. Right? And the reason they overlook it is usually because the interior is done really well. You notice the interior more often when it's done poorly. And I've seen many examples of people who tried to do their own interior, or they tried to generate an automated interior with a software program, or they hired a cut rate interior designer. And what ends up happening is it just looks self-published. It almost looks like, someone just took a Word document and tried to create it themselves. So there's a lot of nuance to interior design. And so again, you could do a cut rate interior design, and maybe you could get away with it if you have a really, 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 really simple design. Or you can spend, up to $3,000, sometimes even more. Those higher end designs budgets are usually going to be on more complex interiors. So you have to take into account, are you trying to bring images in? Are you using, we have an author who wanted to do really cool, unique symbols representing the theme of each chapter that would open each chapter at the beginning. So there's elements like that. Do you have tables and charts? Do you have sidebars? Do you have exercises and worksheets at the end of each chapter, right? There's a lot of factors that are going to affect how much you're going to pay for this. And again, this is a massive range. But like book cover, what you're paying for is that level of mastery, the amount of collaboration you're going to be able to get, and then confidence that you're in the consistency of the product. You could get lucky and pay $250 and get a fabulous design. It's happened. I've seen it happen, but I wouldn't risk it. And then distribution. So distribution, this is essentially the only thing you're paying for here is paying someone to set it up for you. And distribution in self-publishing is basically, there's kind of two dimensions. One of them is print on demand. You can use platforms like Amazon KDP, Ingram Spark, setting your book up, setting your accounts up so that all the metadata is correct, and etc. Some people, this is a really great one to DIY if you feel like you can learn all that. You can do all this yourself. You can set all that up. But some people don't want to figure it out and they're afraid of making a mistake around it. So they'll hire someone to do all the setup for them and that has experience. So that's kind of like print on demand. And then the other side is if you want to do offset printing. So that's big batch printing. If you have a way to sell books direct, if you're selling them directly off your own website, if you're giving speeches or talks or book signings, if you want to be able to send 100 books out to all the teachers associations across the country because you have a book on education and you want to print bulk, there's a lot of bulk printing services that you can also find. And these are things of the whole publishing process, to me, this is the one that you can DIY the most. What you're hiring for is the reason you would hire for this is do you want a seamless do you want experts who really have a lot of experience doing this, and you don't want to be bothered with figuring out all the details? So that's what you would hire for. And the other thing is troubleshooting, because a lot of distribution work we have found is figuring out problems when there are glitches, and there usually are. Even when all the design and the setup's been done correctly, these print-on-demand platforms often get things wrong and make mistakes. We find that about, I don't know, 10 to 20% of the books that we upload, there's a problem on the platform side, on the printer side with the book that we have to solve and navigate. So that's one thing that you might be hiring for, is working with someone who knows how to navigate all that kind of stuff. So again, these are kind of your budget. What can you cut corners on? We just talked about. I would not cut corners on cover design. I can't tell you how many times we'll work with someone who says, "Hey, my friend is a really talented graphic designer. I'm just going to have them design the book." Well, just because you're a graphic designer doesn't mean you know how to design a book. And I've seen incredible graphic designers where I've looked at their other bodies of work, and then I've seen the cover design they generate, and it looks unprofessional. So I'm not saying you can't do it, but beware. Interior design, same concept. There's a science to this. There's a typesetting a book is still it's an art and a science, and it's very, very, very difficult to automate and do cheaply. But the area to cut corners on, as we've discussed, is the distribution side. All right. So platform building. So we already talked about what this is: the author website, the social media content strategy, and let's dive into some of the numbers here. I kind of have a general principle, but I want to dive into the numbers here. Do you need a website? A lot of people don't even think you do. Websites are not necessarily going to be drivers of traffic. I think a lot of people feel like if they build a website, that's where everyone's going to find them. That's not really what they serve. They're more like an online portfolio. So when you're out there promoting your book through all kinds of different channels, people will hear about you, and then going to your website is a place where they can go to find out more about you and see your legitimacy. Or let's say you get interviewed on a podcast and people say, well, where can they learn more? You say, well, look up my book on Amazon and go to my website, right? That's a place where you can go put your bet. So it's kind of like an online portfolio, not a driver of traffic. Now, some websites do drive traffic, but that's usually not going to be the case for an author website. So how much are you going to pay for a website? You could pay 20 grand. Please don't. You don't need to spend that much on an author website unless you're also building out some other complicated business like online courses, et cetera, and the book is just part of it. A basic, simple author website you can easily have designed for $1,000. And if you have experience doing web design, you should do it yourself. If you really do, if you have experience working in Squarespace or Wix, you can make very simple, beautiful, elegant websites that don't look unprofessional. But because your website is a portfolio, right? Not a driver of traffic. If you don't do a website that looks professional, it will backfire. So if you're not going to make sure that you've spent enough and found the right designer to make sure your website is beautiful and professional, don't bother doing one. All right. Content, social media. I'm going to kind of lump these two together. The thing about content is you're going to need to figure out what your content strategy is going to be, right? Again, maybe you want to start a podcast. Maybe you have a book on relationships. And so you want to start a podcast where you invite people to tell their funny relationship stories, right? And you want to interview other marriage counselors and relationship experts, right? And you've decided that's what your thing is going to be. Most of that content is going to be you doing it, right? You're going to be the one doing the interviews. You're going to be reaching out to people. If you decide that your chosen medium is Substack and you would do a Substack blog, you're going to be writing all that. The thing you should be hiring for is getting it all set up right. If you're not able to set up a podcast, for instance, you can hire people to help you get your podcast all set up, get your systems in place, make your episode templates. When we launched our podcast, we figured out a bunch of these tools you can use to kind of make the production of your podcast really easy on an ongoing basis. But but you kind of have to get the whole system set up. So same thing with Substack. It's easy to start a Substack account. It's easy to start a blog, but there are some best practices. And so you could invest a little bit of money to have someone help you build the framework for it and then also kind of give you a strategy, help talk it back and forth. I mean, we'll often work with people to figure out they don't even know what their content strategy should be. They're like, well, I don't know. Someone told me I should do this, but I'm not sure. And it can be helpful to talk with an expert to figure out, what is the content strategy that's going to be enjoyable for you and that's going to also work for your audience. A lot of people only talk about what's going to work for their audience. They don't figure out what's going to be enjoyable for them. And then they do something that they don't like and then they quit. And then it ends up being a waste of money. So it often can be useful to talk to an expert to help you figure out, kind of coach you through the process of figuring out what that should be. And then social media. Now you could spend $5,000 a month to have a social media firm generate content for you and publish it across all the different platforms. That is not worth it, right? I think, again, my approach to social media is, if you want your social media to be good, it's got to be unique and it's got to be genuine. It's got to be authentic. You can't just create some JPEGs and post them up. You can't just use AI to generate, a series of posts that promote your book. That's not going to work. You need to have an ongoing stream of communication with your audience that is drawing off the themes of your kind of longer form content. And that's something that you either need to figure out how to do yourself or hire a company for. And if you hire a company, the good ones are all really, really expensive. So I always feel like people should DIY this, maybe with a little bit of consulting, right? You might be able to find someone who can kind of help you figure out the baseline strategy, what platforms you should use, get those things set up, and then give you some templates and tools moving forward. And then alternatively, you can hire virtual assistants, etc., who can execute on producing and publishing the content you're creating, but the ideas for it are probably going to have to come from you. It's almost impossible to find anyone who's going to do a really good job of generating social media content that's authentic and interesting for cheap. That's just kind of how it works. So these are different budget ranges. These are kind of hard to put money on, but that's kind of how you should be thinking about that piece of it. Where can you cut corners? My approach to platform building is you should really minimize your spend here in the beginning and don't start investing until you've started to experiment with it yourself and started to gain some clarity. So maybe you're kind of experimenting. You try a Substack, you try a podcast, you kind of want to do some things and you realize, oh, this is going to be my sweet spot. I'm realizing that this Substack is what I really love. I'm starting to get traction. Then maybe you might want to invest in optimizing your platform or getting some consulting help to take you to the next level. Some platforms also allow you to invest in advertising and promotions, right? So, but I always like to don't start small here and experiment and figure it out for yourself. And then once you start to have some real conclusions and some real confidence in where you're going with this, that's the point at which you can consider spending a little bit more money. All right. Promotions. Okay. So I'm not going to get into this too much. How much do promotions cost? There's a million promotions out there. Again, how do you get Amazon customer reviews? There's Amazon customer review services. We do one where we do an Amazon giveaway where we give away an ebook to people and we promote it via email and we can get, thousands of people to download the book for free. And then hopefully that'll lead to customer reviews if people like the book, right? So there's services you can use for that. Virtual book tours we talk about. There are book review services that you can hire. Kirkland is awesome. I recommend it, or Kirkus, sorry. We're not at Costco. Kirkus is a great one. I recommend everybody do that for your book. Go pay Kirkus. They'll do an objective review of your book that you can then use excerpts from on your website and on your Amazon page. So I think that's worth doing. And then digital advertisements. Everybody wants to know about digital ads. I talked to someone recently, a guy named Steve Sarner, who has a company called Get Shelf Life, or Shelf Life, sorry. And I met him at the Author Nation conference in Las Vegas. And he actually used to work for Amazon in their ads department. He helped start Goodreads. And so he's been in like the ground floor of Amazon ads around books for years. And he spun off and created his own company. Now, they are very good at what they do, and they focus on nonfiction. So the economics are a little bit for fiction and nonfiction, but same general rule applies. He considers a book to be successful if they're spending $15 in ad budget to generate a sale. And if anybody knows anything about royalties, you're making $3 to $7 per sale. So you are losing money on books. And so for his company, he will not even take on a client who doesn't have a way to monetize that sale beyond the first sale of the book, whether that's multiple books or some of the things that we talked about earlier to monetize, like a course or a subscription service, that kind of thing. So be very careful with digital ads. There are a lot of sharks out there who are going to tell you that they figured out the formula and they want to you can take a course and for only $900 take their course and they'll show you how to optimize your book sales and master digital ads. Very few people have ever succeeded in doing this. My company, we've tried for years. You're not Success is not breaking evens on that one book. Success is not losing a ton and then finding that people who read the first book end up doing more things. So just be very wary on those things. All right. I think we've gotten to the end of the presentation here. So I want to open it up for questions.
All right, we've got several in the Q&A box here. The first two actually are very similar, so I'm going to combine them together.
Great.
The first one is audiobooks on platforms like Audible. We have no control over the price. That's the first part of the question. Please explain briefly the process and costs if you know. And then the second question, audiobooks are very expensive to produce, a major investment. I estimate around $2,500 minimum. Am I mistaken?
You are not mistaken. What was the first part? It was audiobooks. Oh yeah, you can't set the price. I mean, you can go do general research and you can figure out generally. We've got an article on our site about how to figure out pricing, but they are going to set the price. You can tell though by book if you go and look at books in your genre that are a similar length, and you go into Audible or Amazon and just find out what the price for the audiobook is. Your book will probably be priced within that range, so you can get a pretty good sense. In terms of producing an audiobook yourself, the best way to do it, the cheapest way to do it is to record it yourself. You really can do that. I've got this Blue Yeti mic. This cost me $100. You can go to a quiet room in your house, like a walk-in closet or some other space. You can get a little foam on the walls. We recorded some things and I got moving blankets and I put them up all around to absorb the sound. You can actually record a lot of your own audio, and then what you'll end up spending the money on is getting a good editor to review it. But you could get away with spending less than $1,000 to produce an audiobook if you record it yourself. But if you're going to hire narrators, and they're going to be good, yeah, it's going to be more like the $2,500 range. And it can go much higher depending on how much production you want, and how long it is and how many voices you want. Some people want to have different voices for different characters. So yeah, but that's the way to cut corners on an audiobook.
Great answers. The next question is also.
Oh, sorry, one more thing on audiobooks.
Yeah.
So ACX Marketplace. ACX is where you self-publish audiobooks. It's Amazon's self-publishing arm. It's very important I tell you this. Now, and they have this really cool open market for narrators where you go on and you can submit your book and say, here's what I want to pay. Here I want a Southern accent, female, who is sensitive and strong or something, whatever. You give them your kind of profile, and then people will submit samples, and then you listen to their samples and you choose one. But there are tons of AI scams on there now. So what ends up happening is that there are scammers who will submit samples, and they will tell you, and then you'll hire them and pay them, and then they will actually use AI to record your audiobook, and it'll sound pretty good. And then when it's time to upload the book to Amazon, Amazon will reject it because Amazon can tell it was generated through AI. So be really, really, really careful if you're trying to find a narrator on the open market.
Great advice and word of caution there.
Yes.
Yeah. So the next question is also about audiobooks, but this is I'm a children's book author for kids ages 3 to 6. Do you still recommend an audiobook?
No.
All right. Next
Now that
question.
it's mostly a picture book. I mean, I guess at 6 years old, sorry, I've got an 8 year old. So we're at 6 years old, they might just be starting to listen, to read or listen to some longer form. Um, and if it's not a picture book and it's a longer form thing, then yes, you can do an audiobook. My son is addicted to Audible, and he has been for, a couple years now. So, um, but not for picture books.
All right. All right. Next question. What do you think about using Kickstarter or BackerKit as a pre launch book launch strategy? Meaning, use those to raise funds for the more expensive items like audio narration by giving readers early and exclusive content access.
That's fine. You can do that. I mean, a lot of people do the Kickstarter thing. There's an incredible woman, I forget her name. It's I've met her. She's been at like 6 different conferences I've been at. And you can actually look her up. I'll find her information and get it to everybody. You can reach out to her, and she specializes in helping authors do Kickstarters. Um, but there's no shortcuts. And I think part of the problem that some people come into Kickstarter campaigns for their books with is they think if they can just get the book on Kickstarter, that it'll magically start raising itself. And the only way to have a successful Kickstarter campaign is if you actively build a very robust platform to promote that Kickstarter campaign too. And so yeah, it can be a great way to generate pre buzz, but Kickstarter is the mechanism, not the audience. That's really critical. It's a mechanism that you can use to sort of monetize and mobilize your audience, but you can't use it to build an audience. It really won't work that way. And the woman I'm she will tell you the same thing.
Right. Next, how effective, and we're kind of running low on time, so we may not get to all these
Yeah, I'm
questions,
sorry.
but
I had too much information. So you can always reach if you have more questions and you want to ask me at any point. Well, first of all, I put a QR code to download our free ebook. You have to give us an email, but don't worry, we're not spammers. We're not going to like come at you. All it means is you'll get our podcast episodes once a week. And you can also reach out to me, Joel at launchmybook.com if you want to talk anytime. JOEL at launchmybook.com. Yeah.
awesome. And hopefully, Sadie can maybe drop that link in the chat and also maybe your email address for folks to just grab.
Yeah.
Let me try to find one more to just kind of close us out. Um, let me combine these two, okay? How effective are contests and paid reviews? And what would a PR campaign look like? And how helpful is a street team for a book?
Okay,
That might,
so that's like 17 questions wrapped into one. So they're not all the same, they're very distinct. So paid reviews are useful not to generate, they will not generate exposure for you. Okay. So if you pay for Kirkus, for instance, they'll tell you, oh, it'll publish on the Kirkus website. No one's going to see it there. Um, what you're doing is getting a quote that you can use to make your book more sellable once people have heard about it from another place. So it can be, you can take an excerpt from that review. I saw a review once that an author did. The reviewer hated the book, but there was one little sentence in there that was kind of nice. So they took that one little sentence and they put it on their Amazon page, right? And on their website. And so when people get there, that says, Kirkus Reviews said this about my book. So they're effective to help add legitimacy to the book at the point of purchase. What was the next question?
the next one is more about what would a PR campaign look like? And they also asked how helpful a street team is.
All right. So PR, don't do PR for a fiction book. The thing about PR, good PR is extremely expensive. And what you're paying for is the publicist's connections. Okay. And honestly, the PR game is mostly trying to take your book, and it's with nonfiction, and package it into something that's newsworthy. That's what most publicists spend their time doing. And even the best publicists who do the best job can't guarantee results because the news is fickle and what people want to pay attention to is very fickle. So PR, my favorite kind of PR is more niche, right? How do you pitch yourself to all the podcasts that are focusing on your topic, right? So again, let's use that. Let's say you have a book on relationships. What are all the relationships and marriage podcasts out there? There's probably hundreds. Find all those and pitch yourself to them directly, or find a publicist who specializes in that niche approach. That's a much better way than try to blanket PR. That just doesn't really work anymore. It hasn't worked for 20 years. And then street teams, I honestly don't have a lot of experience with street teams, but it's similar to my answer to Kickstarters. Um, a street, it's you can't just kind of hope that it's going to have its own momentum. It needs to be part of a bigger strategy. So if you're doing all the platform building stuff, and then one part of being on of your platform is, hey, sign up for my street team, great. Or if you already have a really big audience of passionate fans, then create a street team to kind of mobilize them and have them do specific things for you and be very concrete. Then yes, that can be effective. But just doing a street team and hoping it'll sort of have a life of its own won't work. Nothing works that way. Literally nothing.
Great answers. I love how you always talk about how you are very honest and realistic, and I appreciate that as a very practical girl. So thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you for being with us today. And thank you to everyone who has attended today. Thank you to Sadie for helping behind the scenes. She did drop the link for you guys for this ebook, so be sure you grab that. And yeah, that's it. Thank you guys so much.
Nice talking to you. And seriously, if you have questions and you want to talk further, feel free to reach out. I'm not going to like sell you on anything. I'll just help you. So
Awesome. Thank you, Joel. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
I